Good morning. As the Secretary of the Energy and Environmental Markets Advisory Committee, it is my pleasure to call this meeting to order. We are excited to welcome you to the fourth EMAC meeting under Commissioner Mersinger being held back home at CFTC headquarters in Washington, D.C. I would like to welcome all of our returning EMAC members, associate members, and subcommittee members, and our new EMAC member, Kara Duda, and new associate member, Dustin Meyer. And of course, our EMAC chair, Dina Wiggins. I would also like to thank Commission staff. As always, it takes a village, and I could not have done this without you. I also want to welcome Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero today. As usual, today's meeting is taking place in hybrid fashion. Several participants are here in person, but several are also on the phone. So to ensure that the meeting goes as smoothly as possible and the recording of the meeting is complete and accurate, please note the following. If you are in person and you would like to be recognized during today's discussion, please place your name card so that it sits vertically on the table. Before you speak, please identify yourself and the organization that you represent on the EMAC. If you are participating virtually and would like to be recognized during the discussion for a question or comment or need technical assistance, please message me within the Zoom chat. Please identify yourself before you begin speaking and signal when you are done speaking. Please speak directly into your phone for optimal audio quality on the webcast. Please unmute your Zoom video before you speak and mute both after you speak. Please only turn on your camera when you're engaging in the Q&A after the panel. If you're disconnected from Zoom, please close your browser and enter Zoom again using the link that I have previously provided for today's meeting. Before we begin this morning's discussion, I would like to turn to Commissioner Mersinger for her opening remarks.
Thanks, Lauren, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We have an ambitious agenda and limited time, so I'm going to have very brief remarks, but I'm very excited to hear about the progress from our subcommittees on the work they've been doing to explore the nexus between metals markets and energy and to examine the role of traditional energy infrastructure and how it plays into the markets that we regulate at the CFTC. Special thanks to everyone for all your time and efforts and energy and work on the subcommittees. I know you all have a lot going on. You all have very busy and demanding day jobs. And I always appreciate your willingness to take time out of your day to help us with these reports, and it really does help us focus what we do here at the Commission. So thank you again. In addition to today's subcommittee progress reports, I'm also very interested to hear from the Electric Power Supply Association about the future demand in electric power. This presentation should be of interest to both of the subcommittees and just a great opportunity to examine the spot market power needs and how they will drive derivative prices and in the metals needed for electrification, required investment in energy infrastructure, and what effect these increased needs will have on our power derivatives markets. And before I begin, I just wanted to give a special thanks to Lauren, who, as always, has put together a great meeting, always goes above and beyond. Another person who has a full-time day job and does all this work in what little free time she has. So thank you. And same to Lillian and John Mark. They both have day jobs, very busy ones, and they have been willing to take some extra time to help us with our subcommittees, and certainly couldn't do this work without you, so thank you. Also a thank you to our subcommittee chairs, Professor Timothy Fitzgerald and Professor Ian Lang. I'm very excited to have them as part of this process. And of course, to Dina, thank you for being our chair and for leading these meetings. It's, again, you're taking time out of your busy day, and I greatly appreciate it. And of course, to all the CFTC staff that makes this meeting happen. And I also have to say a special thanks to our Division of Administration, because today's room temperature finally seems to be reasonable. I don't know if anyone's been to the last few meetings, but we are either freezing or cooking. So I feel like they got it right today. So it's a good start to our morning. And with that, I will turn it back to Lauren.
Thank you, Commissioner Mersinger. I now recognize Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero to give her opening remarks.
Good morning. I'm so pleased to be here with all the EMAC members in Washington, D.C. I think the last time I saw you, we were standing on the edge of of a copper mine in Utah. I thank Commissioner Mersinger for her vision that we could go out and have those real world field experiences. And then, of course, thank Lauren and Lillian and John Mark for their very hard work for this committee. I look forward to hearing about the update on the state of the power markets. Power and related energy markets are necessary for American families and small businesses to keep the lights on, to stay cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And these markets matter to families and businesses. This summer, record heat drove up wholesale power prices to as high as $5,000 per megawatt hour, which is 100 times the normal price. And the Texas grid set 10 all-time peak demand records. And we know that winter is coming, a winter that will be marked by El Nino. In 2021, as we all remember, the grid failures caused by Winter Storm Uri cost more than 200 lives in Texas and left more than 4 million homes without power. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation has warned that much of North America is at elevated risk for having insufficient energy supplies if there is extreme weather this winter. So in order to keep the lights and heat on, there are several ways to strengthen our nation's resilience against these types of severe climate events that can impact our nation's power grid. Ways that will require a coordinated approach across the government. One of those with potential promise is artificial intelligence. Bear with me, I sponsor the CFTC's Technology Advisory Committee, and we are looking at emerging technologies that include AI. So President Biden just issued an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. And in it, the Department of Energy, FERC, and others have been directed to issue a public report describing the potential for AI to improve planning, permitting, investment, and operations for electric grid infrastructure, and to enable the provision of clean, affordable, reliable, resilient, and secure electric power to all Americans. Additionally, the executive order on AI discusses that the Department of Energy's ability to partner to build foundation models that enhance grid reliability and resilience. Properly regulated markets, of course, also create opportunities to strengthen resilience, to help build reliability and reduce power prices for households. And in the short term, rising power prices may act as a signal to reduce or shift unnecessary demand, avoiding blackouts like Texas did this summer. In the longer term, higher prices could lead to investments in new energy sources, including with government incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act. Well-functioning derivatives markets can also, of course, help manage risk of the major projects that states and utilities are pursuing to meet their goals of cleaner and more resilient power markets. Larger projects by states and corporations like offshore wind turbines require companies to borrow over many years, and the ability to use derivatives markets to hedge risks like changing interest rates will help project developers make investments with confidence. Additionally, this year marks a new record for global adoption of renewables, with over 500 gigawatts of capacity added. A study published in Nature Communications last month recognized the growing potential of solar power with its declining costs, while recognizing challenges such as intermittent generation and storage costs. I hope to hear about how the power markets are changing as the adoption of renewable energy continues to accelerate. Investments in solar power, wind turbines, or storage batteries also require critical metals and minerals like copper, lithium, and cobalt. That's why we were standing on the edge of a copper mine. As mineral markets grow, prices may rapidly shift. After lithium prices spiked in 2022, they've fallen by nearly 70%. And the new lithium futures contracts in 2023 show the interest that market participants have in using derivatives to manage this kind of price volatility. The CFTC's role is to make sure that derivatives markets work for those who need them. And if the CFTC meets its mission and ensures integrity in these markets, it means that consumers can be confident that prices for food, fuel, and power are not artificially inflated. Our enforcement program, of course, polices fraud manipulation, including through our new Environmental Fraud Task Force. And our Division of Market Oversight monitors and surveys markets. So if we see spiking powers and energy prices in our markets this winter, The CFTC should study market forces and the specific trading that drove those spikes to determine whether the prices are driven by market fundamentals of supply and demand. I've been calling for us to do deep dive studies in certain cases where there is extreme volatility or spikes in prices. I first started this on September 22nd, 2022 at the first EMAC meeting under Commissioner Mersinger's sponsorship, where my first grandbaby was born that day. And I just 10 days ago had another grandbaby born. So it's only fitting that I'm here today talking about the same thing. But really, thank you to all the members for your service, especially those in the subcommittees. I know we pay well, not at all, but it really is public service. And we are really grateful for your expertise and your continued attention to all of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll go ahead and turn over to Tadina now.
Thank you, Lauren. This committee serves as an important vehicle to discuss matters of concerns to hedgers, consumers, exchanges, firms, and end users within our energy and environmental markets, as well as the Commission's regulation of these markets. There will be 3 panels today during today's meeting with prepared presentations. Following each panel, there will be an opportunity for discussion related to that panel. As chair, I look forward to facilitating the discussion of the associate members' perspectives to the EMAC and working with the EMAC members to provide the commission with feedback and recommendations that can assist the agency in its oversight of our markets. To make sure that today's discussion is consistent with the EMAC charter, which prohibits associate members from providing reports and recommendations directly to the commission, we will first take questions and comments from the EMAC associate members after the panelists have shared their prepared remarks. We will then turn to the EMAC members for their questions and comments on the prepared remarks and any feedback provided by the associate members. As we mentioned, please use the chat function to alert Lauren if you have a question or comment, and I will recognize you as a speaker after receiving your notification. And if you're here in the room, you just turn your tent card up on its side and we will recognize you that way as well. I'll now hand it back over to Lauren for the roll call.
Thank you. Before we begin our panel, I would like to do a roll call of the members and associate members so we have your attendance on the record. EMAC members, after I say your name and organization, please indicate that you are present. Please make sure your phone is not muted. If you're unable to hear your response, please send me a message via the Zoom chat to confirm that you are present on today's call. Rob Kramer, FIA PTG.
Present.
Kara Duda, ICE Futures US.
Present.
Dimitri Carusos, Nodal Exchange LLC.
Present.
William McCoy, Morgan Stanley.
Present.
Jackie Roberts, Public Service Commission of West Virginia. Derek Salmon, CME Group. Tara Shaw, the Energy Council.
Present.
Tyson Slocum, Public Citizen.
Present.
And Dina Wiggins, Natural Gas Supply Association.
Present.
Thank you. EMAC associate members, after I say your name, please indicate that you are present. Matt Egan, American Gas Association.
Present.
Bob Anderson, Committee of Chief Risk Officers. Sneha Begri, OTC Global Holdings LP.
Present.
Greg Broussard, Cargill.
Present.
Paul Sissio, Industrial Energy Consumers of America.
Present.
Frank Hayden, Calpine Corporation.
Present.
Paul Hughes, Southern Company.
Present.
John Melby, Expansive.
Present.
Dustin Meyer, American Petroleum Institute. John Mark Monrad, Beetle.
Present.
John Murphy, Mizuho Securities. Matt Picardi, Commercial Energy Working Group.
Present.
Jamila Perici, Life Powered. Melinda Prudencio, the Energy Authority.
Present.
Sarah Tamalti, BP Energy Company.
Present.
Thank you. Jeff Walker, ACES,
Present.
Karen Wertz, National Futures Association.
Present.
Thank you.
For our first panel today, we will hear from Sharon Theodore from the Electric Power Supply Association about the United States' current and future power needs, the impact on other energy markets, and the role of the derivatives markets in facilitating the expansion of these markets. Sharon, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dina. Good morning, Commissioner Mersinger and CFTC staff, including Chris Lucas and Lauren Folks, who helped coordinate for me being here today, and EMAC members. I'm Sharon Theodore, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at the Electric Power Supply Association here in DC. It's an honor to have this opportunity to speak to you about the many issues surrounding the energy industry today, facing not just EPSA members, but the entire industry as we move forward with the clean energy transition. And I feel like Commissioner Romero Johnston touched on a lot of that in her remarks. From new technologies that can bring down cost and emissions while bolstering reliability to ways energy plays a vital role in other industries, the range of issues is vast. And as Dina noted, for today's discussion, I'll share EPSA's perspectives on the state of the U.S. power markets with respect to current and future power needs, the impact on other energy markets, some of our thoughts on energy market changes that will be needed to evolve the markets, and the role of the derivatives markets in facilitating the expansion of these markets. So just for background, EPSA is the National Trade Association representing America's independent power producers that compete every day without a guaranteed rate of return, primarily in regions operating competitive wholesale markets. EPSA members own and operate a diverse array of assets and have a deep commitment to electric grid reliability. Our members' assets account for roughly 20% of the nation's generating capacity and are actively engaged in an all-of-the-above energy strategy. Our members are investing billions of dollars to build, operate, and maintain assets across the generation and technology spectrum, including natural gas, nuclear, coal, wind, solar, and battery storage. For purposes of the CFTC, EPSA members are end users with a few exceptions. Our members are physical commodity market participants that rely on futures and swaps to hedge and mitigate their commercial risk. We are fortunate to have 3 member company representatives participating on the EMAC: BP's Sarah Tomilty, Calpine's Frank Hayden, and Shell's Matt Picardi, who participates on behalf of the Commercial Energy Working Group. And at EPSA, we believe that an optimal clean energy transition, or more properly, energy expansion, and America's energy future must be built on well-functioning markets that deliver the benefits of competition. We prefer to use the term energy expansion because we want to emphasize that rather than taking away resources during a time of increasing reliability risk, we need to be adding to and expanding on our energy resources and retaining sufficient dispatchable generation that pairs with weather-dependent, non-dispatchable resources to keep the lights on while the grid moves towards greater decarbonization of the energy sector. The entire system is under tremendous pressure to change and adapt, and to do so more quickly than it ever has had to in the past. We will need new infrastructure of all types if we're going to be able to adapt to a fuel mix with higher penetration of renewables and keep the lights on reliably while we do it. We need more generation and transmission, and this means gas pipelines and wires permitting reform, and this is an issue that EPSA has been working on tirelessly. We will also need private investment in developing technologies that promise to enhance the power system in a way that leads to the resilient, reliable, cleaner, and cost-effective grid of tomorrow. This all represents great amounts of capital and commercial risk going forward. So I just wanted to touch on just our efforts in support of reliability. We have worked on multiple occasions with Morning Consult to poll Americans on their priorities regarding the power system and powering their homes. And this is just one of several results that just underscore that reliability and affordability are their most important factors when looking at these issues. Also, over half of Americans are concerned that government policies leading to power plant closures do not provide adequate replacements to support reliable electricity. And I know this group is well aware, but emissions reductions and supporting lower emitting resources are significant policy goals being debated at both the federal and the state level. This issue, in our mind, is closely tied around affordability in terms of how we achieve the emissions reductions while preserving reliability and keeping power affordable for all consumers. So that's sort of our metric or rubric as we're working on our advocacy. And this chart just highlights the emissions reductions achieved to date, and we believe that markets will continue to be the best vehicle for reductions going forward. I don't know why that's not showing up, but anyway, there were a couple of quotes here that I just wanted to point out, but really, in the midst of all the focus on moving to a clean energy future, there's been an increasing focus on the potential reliability impacts associated with the changing resource mix, including concerns that the timing of new generation coming on the system may be insufficient to keep up with the occurring and expected generation retirements and demand growth, and with 2030 being sort of a marker for concern. And I had really just wanted to note here that there are independent voices raising this concern, including from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the primary federal regulator overseeing electric reliability, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, which is the entity who develops mandatory reliability electric standards, and then the ISOs and RTOs, the system operators who've all been undertaking analysis of late regarding system reliability during the expansion. And some of you have probably seen this chart showing the number and range of reliability and extreme weather events that occurred just in 2022. And I just wanted to highlight that a major topic the energy sector has been discussing for all of 2023 is Winter Storm Elliott and the impact that late December 2022 storm had on the power system. And while reliability was maintained in PJM and other effective competitive regions, as well as non-RTO regions of the country, we continue to work with our members and other industry processes underway to evaluate and respond to the lessons learned. As the worsening climate causes more frequent extreme weather events throughout the US and the world, including hotter, more volatile summers and colder, unpredictable winter weather, it's absolutely critical that policymakers and regulators keep grid reliability at top of mind when making decisions, particularly where the decarbonization process adds to reliability challenges. And in this regard, I just wanted to highlight that last week was deemed Reliability Week by FERC and NERC, and this included the release of several reports, including NERC's upcoming winter reliability assessment that was referred to earlier, a joint FERC and NERC final report with recommendations on Winter Storm Elliott, and a joint statement on reliability from FERC Chairman Phillips and NERC CEO Jim Robb. FERC also held its annual reliability conference, and that included focus on the EPA's proposed rule on GHG standards and the implications for reliability, as well as gas-electric coordination issues. And related to the FERC conference, oops, let me just advance that. Related to the FERC conference, last week, EPSA, along with NGSA, and the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, or INGA, issued a joint paper that was developed this year to identify and offer proposed solutions to mitigate the power system challenges experienced during Winter Storm Elliott including recommendations for improvements to gas-electric coordination, as well as infrastructure challenges. And we thank NGSA and DENA, as well as INGA, for that collaboration. And as a further note on this topic, current electric reliability standards are based on operations of traditional generation resources. And so this is another one of the issues we will need to look at going forward, so that we have new standards that reflect the operational characteristics of wind and solar. And this is something that NERC is focused on, and those standards will soon be under development. And then just again, I've referenced the EPA's greenhouse gas emissions proposed rule. And I point to this just in terms of a recent NERC report that identified energy policy as the #1 risk to electric system reliability. And we think that, this proposed rule, which is well intended to reduce carbon emissions from the power sector by targeting coal and natural gas generation resources, is expected to have significant impacts on the pace of retirements and the operational profiles of those resources. The proposed rule is based on the use of carbon capture and hydrogen co-firing, and these are both nascent technologies with significant deployment barriers to facilitate retention of much needed dispatchable resources. The more we look at how the rule would be deployed, the more difficult the challenges appear to be. EPSA is not, and other generation entities are not the only ones raising concerns around the proposed rule. The ISOs and RTOs have weighed in with their concerns. And there's a recent report by the Energy Futures Initiative Foundation, a group led by former DOE Secretary Ernie Moniz, which identifies many of the same challenges, including the need for thousands of miles of pipelines to transport the CO2 and hydrogen. So again, the rule is based on an industry that we would need to build from the ground up at this point. And at a time when existing dispatchable resources essential to maintaining reliability should be preserved, but are increasingly closing, the EPA's proposal could accelerate retirement or lead to resources choosing to run less often in order to comply with the proposed rule. And it's inarguable that we should be endeavoring to reduce emissions economy-wide, but we just feel that there needs to be a full assessment of potential reliability impacts. And I just wanted to zero in on the impact of federal and state policies that are being seen at the RTO level. And this chart just reflects recent analysis by PJM. They have determined that a total of 40 gigawatts of generation is at risk of retiring by 2030, with 24 gigawatts, as shown on this slide, attributed to retirement from a range of federal and state policies. And in releasing this information, PJM emphasized that their projections are conservative. The analysis was also completed prior to issuance of the EPA's GHG proposal. PJM has further identified that the EPA proposal puts an additional 15 gigawatts of coal-fired resources at risk in the region, which would push at-risk generation to 29% of total installed capacity. Moreover, an additional 22% of PJM's installed capacity, the most efficient dispatchable gas-fired generation, would potentially be required to undertake expensive control options or significantly reduce operations under the EPA rule. And so as we look at all of these policy factors, we know that power demand is on the rise. This validates the need for more resources, though as noted that the trend is retirement outpacing additions to the system. And there have been numerous studies showing significant demand growth from electrification, including studies by EIA and the National Renewable Energy Lab. And that study in particular showed an electrification, increasing consumption by as high as 38% by 2050, and that's based on a 2018 reference. And so we know much of this anticipated growth will be from EVs, commercial and home heating, and data centers. And I just wanted to note a couple of data points around this. The US Department of Energy has determined that a typical data center consumes 10 to 50 times the energy per floor space of an average office building. And we have the largest data center hub in the world located in the DC metropolitan area in Loudoun County, Virginia. The county's head of economic development says the county has 31 million square feet right now, another 4 million that's currently under development, and expects growth to approximately 40 million square feet. And the state of Virginia in total is expected to double its number of data centers by 2028. There are also unique challenges with accurate load forecasting related to EVs and data centers and other growing energy-intensive technologies, including AI. Among other things, there's an effort underway by the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, along with grid and utility operators, to develop the historical EV data to underpin forecasting. And our view is just that sound public policy dictates that ensuring sufficient electricity supply should accompany these efforts around electrification. Another key factor in enabling the energy expansion is fixing a process which has been notoriously slow and has led to serious delays in power supply projects, permitting and siting reform. And Congress agreed to initial permitting reforms in spring 2023 as part of the debt relief legislation, as well as increased discussion of the topic in the energy space, but we're not at the finish line. Policymakers are struggling to balance environmental protection and streamlining federal siting, but there are voices on both sides of the aisle working to find common ground for a workable approach to reform. EPSA is actively working on the Hill with those members and others to communicate the importance of permitting and siting reform to support an energy expansion that is safe, timely, reliable, and cost-effective. We support permitting and siting reform as part of America's energy future and to help secure power system reliably. We remain encouraged by the reported progress and will continue to advocate to find a workable compromise that advances America's energy expansion, both in this bill and if additional steps are needed in future legislation. Our current infrastructure is also in need of updating to accommodate added forms of energy, including wind, solar, battery storage, and more. In summary, federal permitting needs to strike an appropriate balance between environmental protection and building the essential infrastructure needed to maintain a reliable and low carbon grid. In terms of what else is happening in the energy landscape, the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act unquestionably enables the largest investment in emission reduction efforts and electrification in history. And we are concerned, however, that the IRA continues to extend subsidies to mature technologies that no longer require federal support to deploy in competitive electricity markets. And this subsidization distorts market prices, and ultimately consumers pay more to likely little effect. Our view is that federal energy policy should not support a patchwork of priorities. Rather, there should be a holistic market-based approach, such as carbon pricing, that prioritizes reliability and competition. Our view is that economy-wide carbon pricing, rather than a piecemeal approach, would be the more effective and efficient route to rapidly reduce emissions and meet the goals that policymakers are seeking. This, as I think this group is aware, just does not appear politically palatable at this time. So just turning to supply, the takeaway here is that while increasing solar and wind currently account for a relatively small amount of total US production. In 2022, according to EIA, renewables represented 13% of total electricity production. Additionally, from an operational standpoint, it takes multiple renewable megawatts to replace 1 megawatt of thermal generation. It's not a one-to-one replacement. So as we move to increasing, it will take just a massive increase and investment in these resources. And this is just another look at the projected supply. But again, gas generation will remain a critical resource for decades to come and will be needed for flexibility and fast start ramping capability to balance the system as large amounts of renewables come online. And I've discussed expected demand and supply, but I just wanted to add a note on long-term prices. We can find a lot of short-term pricing information that looks back, short-term information, but we were not able to find publicly available data that showed the longer-term price trends. And with the massive investments that will be required, there will be significant costs. And the bottom line is that market pricing must support the necessary cost and risk of such investments. So just to summarize, EPSA's energy expansion principles and priorities include our conviction that competitive wholesale power markets are the most effective tool to achieve policy objectives by encouraging private capital deployment and innovation at the lowest cost, while appropriately shifting investment risk to resource developers and operators and not consumers. Existing dispatchable resources that provide reliability services to the system are and will be needed to keep the power grid reliable, even as the operational requirements of those resources are likely to change. And emission reduction goals can be achieved through market-based mechanisms while maintaining reliability, but the timeline must be based on reality and align with the commercial and cost-effective evolution of power grid operations. And finally, just to highlight some of our reforms that we think are important to consider, because the markets will need to evolve to accommodate all these new resources and technologies. We think we should keep what works. We should retain the current market frameworks, energy and ancillary services, capacity markets where they exist, and analyze what doesn't. Review factors that have hampered the ability of capacity and energy markets to provide accurate price signals for investment to generators. We think out-of-market subsidies and other regulatory decisions can interfere with accurate price signals and the adequate compensation for resources needed to maintain reliability. Some of the changes that we think should be considered are to adjust reliability planning criteria to account for more extreme weather conditions and the changing resource mix. This is something under consideration by NERC and the RTO regions. Update parameters to better reflect and value the role every type of resource plays in providing installed capacity, and develop additional real-time products to provide needed services like flexibility ramping, quick load following, and regulation. We've also jointly developed recommendations and approaches to improve gas-electric coordination, as mentioned previously. We will continue to advocate for policies and regulatory approaches that are based in operational reality, support reliability, include meaningful and inclusive permitting reform, market-based emissions reduction policy, and realistic timelines for decarbonizing the grid. Addressing the pace of retirement and retention of much-needed dispatchable resources to operate the grid reliably must be a top priority. And with respect to the role derivatives markets can play, we think that hedging will continue to be important to mitigate the price volatility with more frequent extreme weather, as well as the risk of the significant infrastructure and technology investments that will be needed. And the timing around all of that is very uncertain. We support the CFTC's consideration of issues related to carbon markets, which will also be increasingly important for IPPs to manage risk. Further, we appreciate the EMAC focus on energy expansion related issues and support the specific focus on physical energy infrastructure and the metals markets. And I want to thank Commissioner Mersinger for her leadership of EMAC and bringing these matters to the forefront. Thank you again for the invitation to be here to share thoughts about how EPSA sees the energy landscape and how we are engaging to help deliver the power needed for today and in the future. I look forward to further discussion and any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. At this point, I'd like to open the floor to comments and questions from the associate members of EMAC. I don't see anybody in the room. Lauren, is there anyone? Oh, no, we have somebody. No, we do have two people. Good. I saw Paul's card up first. Paul, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my gosh, that was a great presentation. Very, very well done. Yeah, this is our number one issue for manufacturers. We cannot supply the raw materials, the goods, to accommodate supply chain, which includes supplying our military needs without reliability. Think of steel, aluminum, chemicals, plastics, paper, steel, or glass. Those areas consume about 80% of all the energy within the entire manufacturing sector. When there is a reliability issue, it costs tens of millions of dollars. Sometimes it damages our equipment and is a threat to the health, to the safety of our employees. So we take this really as a high priority. The premature and voluntary shutdown of coal-fired generation remains what our view is the easiest, should be the easiest of efforts to help the short-term reliability. But we see a significant disconnect between state policies where utilities are voluntarily shutting down these facilities and the need at the federal level for responsibility to keep the lights on. Troublesome is the fact that in 2022, we had the smallest increase of interstate natural gas pipelines ever added to the grid. And we're all relying upon more natural gas to fill the void for coal, again, for purposes of reliability. And we have this mandatory state RPSs and federal incentives that in the past have been a good thing, but now are sending the wrong market signals to generation. There's no value placed on the reliability of those incremental generation, and that is a substantial issue for us. Just so you know, large manufacturing like my companies, contribute to responding to these reliability issues, because sometimes we can quickly slow down our demand. I mean, we think of an electric arc furnace, okay? It's a huge source of demand. And times of reliability, that demand response is really vital to helping to keep the grid going. And so that's something that I would like everybody to consider as a policy that we need to advocate for and to promote. And finally, we all know that FERC and NERC have responsibility for electric reliability, but there is no agency in charge of natural gas reliability, which was a point that Chairman Phillips of the FERC made not at the last FERC meeting. And he's asking Congress to help by giving an agency, he didn't say FERC, but give an agency responsibility for reliability, and that's overdue. In the big picture of things, all of what I just talked about impacts volatility and what the CFTC is all about. Thank you.
Matt?
Thank you, and thank you, Sharon, for that presentation. Great kind of background on the struggles from a environmental and reliability point of view. What I wanted to just take a minute to do was maybe drill down a little bit more and talk a little bit about price formation, because that's very important to traders and hedgers in power markets. Price formation comes in large part from rules that are established by the primary regulator of power markets, which is FERC, but they are also, those rules are developed by all the RTOs where these markets exist. And there's basically three types of markets that Sharon referred to. There's a capacity market, an ancillary service market, and an energy market. And practically speaking, the energy market is the only place where hedging and trading can occur. The other markets are kind of occur through the physical markets administered by the RTOs. What these policies probably are doing is affecting those markets, which one would expect because they're policies that affect the markets. But what we have to watch is how the RTOs and FERC responds to this, because we had a situation for a bunch of years where the markets worked well to develop what they called combined cycle, natural gas combined cycle plants. And right now we're in a period of time where we're trying to encourage renewables, and we're trying to keep the maintain system reliability, and the dynamics and the rules that were set up are not necessarily accommodating the transition. Now, all the RTOs are trying to come up with rules, and they're unique in each one to address this. I mention this because those rules impact what you see traded on your exchanges. So PJM pricing that you see is affected by rules PJM puts in place, rules that FERC approves. Our group wants to see well-functioning markets where we can get price discovery, unless the rules are developed in a way that accommodate the way the transition is going. The ability to get that price discovery and see the liquidity like we've seen in the past will be compromised. And we're hoping that will occur, and we're trying to encourage that. And I mention this from the point of view of that does trickle into the secondary markets, the derivative markets, the ability to get a hedge going out 10 years versus 5 years to support either hedging a customer's supply needs or developing an asset. Those rules have significant impact going forward. And I just think it's something that this committee, and I think I've said in the past, is part of what you need to watch to understand the way the markets work. So, and I think maybe the infrastructure committee that we're working on will take that up a little bit. But I just mentioned that because it's kind of drilling down maybe 5,000 feet more than what Sharon talked about, focusing on price formation and what companies can do in the power markets right now to hedge. And it goes to an important issue that Paul brought up, because if the markets aren't developed in a way that's allows for this price discovery and liquidity and forward hedging to occur, his clientele can't forward their positions in electricity markets, and they'll be left having to deal with volatile prices without being able to get good hedges. So that's what we watch out for. It's a little bit below what Sharon was talking about, but it's very important as we talk about these issues, I think.
Thank you, Matt. Lauren, is there anyone on the phone who's indicated from the associate members they want to speak? Sarah?
Thank you, Sharon, very much for your presentation. It was excellent. I think you highlighted, the impacts of weather and infrastructure constraints on these financial markets. And, those are the things that I think at the Reliability Alliance, when we all met, we're trying to address. I mean, first and foremost, we're going to need more gas infrastructure in addition to electric infrastructure to solve some of the gas-electric coordination issues. Throughout history, a lot of industries have invested in the gas system. We're now kind of in crisis mode where we haven't invested in the gas system. And as you mentioned, the power load is increasing, to the point where, we need to address the infrastructure constraints, or we're going to continue to see price spikes. Once we address the infrastructure constraints, I think, then a lot of the work that we're doing around gas electric coordination will be a lot easier. We all went through, a year-long process to talk about gas electric coordination. And I think highlighting gas infrastructure was one of the things that I heard from everybody. Gas infrastructure doesn't necessarily mean more gas. It means more reliability and less price spikes. So I think we need to get that in our head versus, people, focusing on, this is the, going to prolong use of gas or, create a system where more gas is being used. It's just a reliability issue, frankly, at this point. Thank you.
Are there any other associate members who wish to speak? All right, thank you to the associate members who spoke out and had offered comments. And now I'm going to ask for comments and feedback from the EMAC members. And Tyson, I see that you are first on the list here.
Thank you so much. And Sharon, great presentation. Thank you. I've got two quick observations and then a question, if I may. So there was a chart that was produced by PJM that you had in the presentation. And I just think it's important to note that this is a pretty selective use of data, right? It just shows retirements, but retirements triggered by just a few chosen state and federal policies based upon statutes if you were to just look at this chart, it would say that there were no retirements in 2022 and 2023. So it's just looking at a select few retirements, and it's not a net generation chart, right? So it doesn't show new generation coming on. And so I just think that it's useful for purposes of looking how policy might be impacting existing resource mix, but it's not showing the whole picture, and it's taking a rather selective view of what might be driving some of these retirements.
And I guess I would just comment, and they do have a chart, and probably I should have included that instead, that shows the total expected retirements from both economic and policy driven, which again is that 40 gigawatt number that I mentioned. Really the point here that I was trying to illustrate is that the pace, this is by 2030, the concern, we want new renewables, we want other new necessary infrastructure to support that to come online. The concern is that at this time, the policies that generation has to respond to are accelerating retirement, causing early retirement of resources, and the system isn't keeping up with the replacement generation. And that's really all I was intending to say by this point here is we know it's coming, it's just meshing the timelines up. You've got a significant interconnection backlog in PJM and other regions. They've all been working, as fast as they can to resolve those issues and get those new resources through the process to get interconnected. If you need other types of, going to the permitting and siting issues, that's hampering moving things forward, whether it's generation or transmission. So that's really the point.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, the policies that are driving this, they're not just random. They are public health policies designed at getting at real issues of toxic pollution and of greenhouse gas emissions, which is clearly a threat to all of life's survival here on the planet. And so, that there is a genuine need for these policy initiatives. And I hear a lot about the term premature retirements, and I just have to gently push back on that. I mean, one could argue that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates caused the premature retirement of the typewriters, right? That we are in an era of constantly disruptive evolution of technologies that provide benefits. And, my analogy to typewriters might not be great, since the operation of a typewriter doesn't emit toxic pollutants that kill people unless you're a really bad writer. And just one other quick observation on the permitting reform issue, and there was another chart about that. There was one thing in that page that wasn't raised that I think is very important, that one of the big barriers in getting plan generation online is not permitting issues, it's interconnection queues, where facilities have got the capital, they've gotten the permits, but they cannot plug into the grid because of significant problems with the way that the grid operators manage those queues. And that has nothing to do with permitting reform or anything like that. And so I think that if there's going to be a discussion about challenges of getting new generation online, it has to start with interconnection queue reform and the way that the grid operators are managing that before we start talking about limiting legal and constitutional rights of communities that are being asked to host these facilities. And then one quick question, if I may, on hedging, which is obviously important for the commission's jurisdiction. We talked about some of the big winter storms, Uri and Elliott, where not only were the infrastructure systems strained by these extreme weather events, but the futures and physical spot prices sort of went haywire. And so can you talk a little bit about your members' challenges with the futures markets during these extreme weather events, as you yourself said, are increasing with frequency because of climate change? Are these extreme weather events creating problems of your members' ability to adequately hedge their exposure to price risk? Thank you.
Thank you for all your comments and the question. I'll comment on your observations just on the state and federal policies to move to a clean grid. I mean, we're totally supportive of that and agree with what you're saying. The issue or the point that we are trying to emphasize in our advocacy is you must have realistic timelines associated with the move to implement these changes so that you can match up the assurance of reliability of the grid as you move towards the cleaner grid. It has to be realistic with, as you even pointed out, with interconnection grid, the ability to get necessary, cleaner resources and technologies on the grid. So that is our position on that. And with respect to interconnection, this is something that is a major issue. And again, all of the transmission operators, because it's beyond ISOs and RTOs, but they are all looking at the necessary reforms to facilitate a more streamlined process that has, first ready, first served, I think anyone correct me but I think that's the methodology that some of the regions are adopting to help move that process forward. And then on the hedging, and again, some of our members could probably speak to this in more detail, but yes, these more extreme weather events are, among the challenges is hedging and just obtaining the fuel you need, hedging your price risk through these types of events. So yes, that's critical. And again, I don't know if other members have anything to add on what they are experiencing.
Sarah, let me see if we have any other comments from members. Dimitri?
Hi, good morning. Commissioner Mersinger, thank you for having us here. It's nice to be back in DC, although I love the travel as well. Fellow panelists, it's great to see you all in person. Sharon, wonderful presentation, very detailed. Thank you for the comprehensive nature of all the aspects that you presented. I think I have 4 points of observation and perhaps emphasis to make. First, the demand growth story is really not to be underestimated. And we very much appreciate the attention paid to this notion with the language that EPSA put forward of energy expansion instead of energy transition. And I think what might be hard for folks is the recency effect, which is to say that if you go back to that slide, what may not have been noticed is just how flat the demand growth was over the last 10 to 15 years. If you look closely during that period, it's a long story, but actually the last 10 or 15 years is relatively flat. And what happened there actually was all this server demand, this data server demand growth was partially offset or largely offset with the transition to first fluorescent and then LED lighting. That's how substantial that policy impact was. And it bought us 10 to 15 years of flat growth. But going forward, my goodness, you can't on the one hand say, well, the way we solve the climate crisis is electrify everything and not recognize what that means for demand growth. So this is a serious, serious challenge that we really need to understand the urgency for. And then second, there really is no shortage of supply resources to meet that challenge. So I really do want to emphasize, I know other folks are looking at this and focused on it, but the permitting is a really serious issue. There are tens of thousands of hundreds of gigawatts that are standing in line to be added to the grid that aren't being added, and it's not acceptable. That's a very serious challenge for us. And looking at market models where they've done a better job, perhaps ERCOT in terms of permitting is a useful model to look at. Third, and again, this is for the benefit of maybe the non-experts in the room, but sometimes the reliability concern can be simplified or articulated as a contrast between renewable resources and thermal and nuclear resources. But we need to be clear that reliability goes way beyond fuel type, right? So during Winter Storm Uri, not only were there challenges with lower output from solar and wind, which was largely forecast, by the way, but widespread unexpected outages from gas transmission, gas generation, coal generation, and nuclear generation, right? Likewise, the unprecedented heat wave this summer and ERCOT and the demand growth we saw in ERCOT this summer was, the unsung hero here was all the solar that was added, because that directly met the heightened load during the afternoon hours. And it may be lost on folks, but gas plants had to actually go down by August because they had to work so hard all summer long to meet that tremendously long heat wave. So we just need to understand that reliability is a huge concern, but it goes well beyond this notion of, simplistic notion of renewable dispatchable and thermal, assuming it's always dispatchable, because it's not. There are challenges there as well. And finally, I think it's critical to say that we support market-based mechanisms as well that use the price signal as much as possible. Absolutely. And we agree that a national carbon tax would be a rational tool to guide investment decisions within the guidelines of broad policy goals. However, it's also important to note that the perfect cannot be made the enemy of the good, right? So absent a perfect solution, such as a carbon tax, other tools such as subsidies and/or mandates are likely needed. Because the reality is that inaction is not an option, right? So we welcome and encourage all efforts to bring a more rational tool set to the policy agenda. Absent that, we can't just sit by and be idle. Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the EMAC members? No. So what we're going to do to make sure that we keep on the straight and narrow here in accordance with our charter, we're going to go back to comments and questions from the associate members, and then we'll come back and pick up additional comments from members, and then we'll turn it over to our commissioners. So Sarah, as an associate member, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to address Tyson's question about hedging. And, as you know, we're a swap dealer. And so we provide that service for the market. And, we're not seeing enough hedging. The time to hedge is now, before you have an event. When you're in an event, that's when people are panicking and there's no hedging going on. It's trying to cover the fact that you didn't hedge. And so, anything we can do to support hedging right now would be valuable.
Thank you. Any other comments from associate members? All right, and we'll go back and pick up and see if there are any comments from EMAC members. Anyone on the line, Lauren? Bill?
Yes, thank you. Again, it's great to be back in DC for this, for the EMAC. Likewise, the travel is great, but it's important as we address a lot of the policy issues. I think I'm just echoing what Sarah just said about hedging, as I was reading press reports about a number of projects for wind turbines that have been delayed or put aside due to basically the economic costs of interest rates, inflation, and supply problems. And as I'm reading about the interest rates, again, underscoring the need for endorsing and promoting as much hedging as possible, because potentially some of these projects wouldn't necessarily have to be delayed.
Any further comments from our EMAC members? Oh, Dimitri, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dina. Just a quick comment off of Sarah and Bill's comment. It makes me, note the interconnectedness of what might otherwise be some disparate issues at hand. When Sarah says that it's important to hedge now and to have available hedging now, that also means that you need a strong clearing infrastructure to do that. And while I feel confident in the clearinghouse infrastructure represented by the members here today and those that are virtual, there are concerns about separate policy agendas on capital requirements for the bank FCMs, the bank clearing members. And that's a serious issue because that's where a lot of the liquidity to support the hedging comes from. And we certainly want to make sure that that liquidity is retained going forward. We're confident we can do our job. We need our support, though.
Kara?
Great presentation, Sharon. Appreciate it. I was just echoing Dimitri's comments and maybe suggesting that this is something that our subcommittee could look at. The Basel Capital Rule and G-SIB surcharge is concerning for the industry. I know at GMAC last week there was a really great presentation, and I think it would be something that maybe this group could look at and the impact on our markets here.
I don't see any other comments. Lauren? Commissioner?
That was a wonderful presentation, and I think exactly kind of what we needed to hear, especially with the work we're doing. So thank you on that. And to, Dimitri and Kara, we've talked a lot about the Basel III capital requirements that are coming up and the impact on our bank FCMs. I had not really thought of it specifically within the sense of the energy markets, but that is a great point and something that we probably need to be really thinking about. Just given the potential impact of what could happen to our bank FCMs. So thank you for bringing up that point. On a whole other side, a question that I had, and I'm not, this might be for Sharon, someone else might be able to address it, but when we're looking at the potential for new generation coming online with renewables, to Tyson's point about, not just on the permitting side, the kind of the piece of landowners and communities. When I was back home in South Dakota last weekend, it was the first time I saw signs that said no wind farms in our backyard. It was a new, I've never seen it before, but it's starting. It was clearly a concern. And so when they are estimating some of the generation that may come online with renewables such as wind and solar, where you do need a lot of land. Were those calculations made in a way that takes into account the fact that, not everyone is going to be willing to, participate or let the wind farm come up in their backyard or want the solar panels in their field? So and again, I'm not sure who can answer that, but I just think it's an interesting side of the story that no one's really talking about. The fact that, we are expecting all this generation, but it does, kind of depend on people being willing to allow that infrastructure, on their land, in their communities.
I totally agree with that observation. I mean, it is a challenge, again, as you note, with just the land required to do some of this going forward. The CEQ proposal on NEPA reform, it does have the community considerations as part of what they're looking at, balancing that with just having a workable process that moves these projects through. So that is something that is factored into that pending rule right now. But I mean, this has been, just the community issues on permitting and project development. It's been an ongoing issue within the industry for many years, and I think a lot of companies have done a lot of work in terms of their engagement in communities to try to address concerns and make adjustments. And then again, this pending proposal is formally looking at those issues. And I'm sure others who develop have other very firsthand experiences and thoughts with it. But
Nothing else. Well, I think now we're going to need to take a break for a little while. Sharon, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you to all the associate members and EMAC members who participated in the conversation. And we're now going to take a short break until 10:30, and we'll come back for our next panel. Thank you. For our second panel today, we have Ian Lang, who's the chair of the EMAC Subcommittee on the Role of Metals Markets in Transitional Energy, and he's going to provide an update on the work that group is doing. Ian?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. My apologies for not being there in person. After this, actually have to run to a groundbreaking for a United States Geological Survey building that was funded as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we have our Colorado congressional, component on campus today for that. But it's also along these lines, as USGS does a lot of things like the criticality surveys and geologic exploration for mineral resources throughout the United States. So Colorado School of Mines continues to be the place where there's lots of things happening around mining. For an update as to what's happening with the subcommittee, we've obviously met a number of times. There was some discussion of do we have all of the kind of players in this market that we would need to hear from? And we've had some discussion about adding additional members like downstream members, say car companies, and upstream members, say mining companies. And those conversations are at different stages of completion. But one of the things that we've done, I guess that's of note, is to try to look for a downstream and an upstream, we'll say, representative to help us understand those issues a little better. So at this point, we have sort of a draft of where what we'd like to see in the report. There's usually at our meetings, there are questions about, are these the kind of things that the committee is going to find useful? Or would the committee like to hear X or Y? So the subcommittee would certainly be interested in knowing the thoughts of EMAC around this, any particular topics you'd like highlighted, any particular issues that I'm going to discuss that you either say are should be downgraded or upgraded or something like that. We're certainly happy to hear that. But the current plan is to sort of first set the stage in the report. So, why are we talking about minerals? What's going on in mineral markets in terms of, their potential increased demand or their expected increased demand as the clean energy transition kind of moves forward, or as we move into different kinds of energy generating technologies that require many more minerals. Then our plan is to talk about the role of CFTC, or the role of markets in these mineral investments. So we're trying to figure out at what level of market size would we be interested in having, some sort of futures or derivative markets involvement. One of the things we've sort of discussed and is sometimes I feel unclear in the discussion, say in the general press, is that many of these mineral markets are extremely small. And so, you're talking very, very little amount traded, very few potential producers and very few potential demanders. And so, in some sense, is there a market that might be too small for some sort of intervention or some sort of change in the way that it's currently operating? Do you just exacerbate market power issues if you bring in some sort of derivative or futures market? So we're trying to think about what is the right size, what kind of minerals, do we think are going to grow to be the right size? In our discussion so far, a lot of downstream users, right? There are very specific contracts that they're looking for to provide a benchmark as to where they should be signing their contracts. So see this price discovery role of CFTC and the futures markets. So what are those products that industry is most interested in providing or having some sort of price discovery mechanism for? Certainly with the move in many of the batteries that are in cars away from cobalt and into nickel, right now there's a lot of interest in having a better price discovery mechanism for nickel in these batteries. So that's certainly one of the things we're discussing. We're thinking about what might be going on in the future in terms of just substitution in and out of a product that we're interested in, as I just mentioned, right? Like, so if we were to write this report, 5 years ago, we would have talked a lot about cobalt and less about nickel, because cobalt was the main mechanism within the battery. And that in this case, what nickel or cobalt do are kind of like heat transfer properties, but that's besides the point. But people have largely substituted out of cobalt into nickel. So thinking about how are these substitutes potentially affecting the markets moving forward, where might we see people moving from product A to product B? If you follow the battery space a little bit, there's also this idea of a different kind of battery that doesn't have any nickel or cobalt in it. So to what extent do we need to worry about, say, setting up a market for nickel and then all of a sudden nobody being interested in it anymore because we've all switched to a different kind of battery? We have these, in some sense, these are all really niche markets, and they could be, because of that, they could be affected greatly by just changes in technological progress. We've had discussions about, do we want to focus on kind of like the upstream, mineral product, or more of the midstream / downstream metal product that is actually going to be put into a consumer-facing product, or that's going to be put into the battery, or that's going to be put into the magnets that are in, wind turbines. So do we want, in some sense, do we want nickel, or do we want, class 1 nickel as sort of a product that there would be for price discovery? Not all nickel can be made directly into, class 1 nickel that goes in a battery, or maybe like high quality, low quality deposits, or different kinds of nickel concentrations within a deposit. And so what is the right level to think about? I think of this as akin to, we have crude futures and we have gasoline futures, sort of the raw product and the refined product. So similarly here, how are we thinking about the raw product versus the refined product? The next idea in our report is to move on to just other issues to keep in mind, or what are important issues that the committee should be aware of and should be ready to think about how to respond to if they come to a head or if they come to play. So we're thinking about things like mineral geopolitics. How are the interactions with China? How are the interactions with Indonesia? How is what the Europeans are doing in terms of their critical mineral strategy? How do all those mineral geopolitics play a role? This can sometimes be called, obviously, like onshore. Do we try for onshoring? Do we try for friendshoring, where friendly nations provide some of these products for the American market, either all the way upstream, where that's where the mines are, or upstream and midstream, where that's where the mines and the refiners are? We need to think about, in some sense, de-risking the investment chain for these mineral markets. There's a lot of good stories where, because these are small markets, when an investment is made to increase the supply of a given product, you often put, multiple % of world supply on the market, which obviously has a negative impact on the price, which could have a detrimental effect on other potential suppliers coming onto the market. So if you know that company A could think about investing in increasing capacity, and that would add, say, 10% to the market and really reduce the price, then you're not going to be able to make much investment or have much investment certainty on your own end with one other supplier being able to really move the price. It's something that we don't see as often in, say, oil or natural gas markets. Certainly a discussion of China also has its own futures markets. We also have other markets like the London Metals Exchange. How do we interact, or how do all these markets interact together? How do we think about ensuring that the markets in the United States are the ones that people use to use a contact, say, through shipping? How do we make sure that the US is the flag of choice for these kind of markets? And then we would kind of want to talk about what are the impacts of recent government policies, say the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, a lot of these domestic content rules for getting the adders to the subsidies in IRA are kind of being defined now, or they've recently been defined. And so now firms are responding to the fact that there is specific rules in place as opposed to just generalities that were in IRA. How do we think about the upcoming recycling boom? Do we expect to see a number of recycling facilities brought online? And then lastly, just more generally, there's a lot of discussion through the NGOs or the international government agencies like the International Energy Agency of just large increases in mineral demand. We do not see, where we do have some futures markets, we do not see the markets kind of pricing those in. And so then we're trying to figure out, is this a problem? Is there an issue in the market? Is there something that you might need to be corrected / changed as a result? But these are kind of open questions that we're just hoping to provide some information on, make the committee aware that these are things that will have to be thought about, and when decisions are made or when other entities affect the market, and you think about how to respond to that. So hopefully that was helpful in thinking about, or in understanding our thought process so far. As I said, the subcommittee is always happy to hear focus on this, don't focus on that, or I've also liked to see some discussion of. And so if the EMAC committee members have thoughts, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Ann. Are there any comments or questions from the EMAC associate members? Hearing none, I'll move on to the EMAC members. Are there any comments or questions from the EMAC members? Nothing online? Commissioner?
Just a quick comment that the list that you mentioned far exceeds anything that I could have thought of. So I think you guys have done a great job of identifying a lot of discussion points and areas to drill down. And I think it's going to be very useful as we move forward and forward-looking report versus a lot of times we are looking at previous policies. I like the fact that we're really looking ahead in this with the subcommittee and the report. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who's working on this. I think it's going to be really fascinating.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. And I think at this time we need to take a short break for our next panel. Will start at 11 o'clock. So we'll be in a break until then. Thank you. All right, we have our third panel ready to go here, I think. Tim Fitzgerald is the chair of the EMAC Physical Energy Infrastructure Subcommittee, and he's going to give us an update on that subcommittee's work. Tim?
Thank you very much.
There we go.
The Physical Infrastructure Committee of EMAC has had a productive start to its work. The subcommittee has met 4 times since June. These meetings have featured lively discussions on a range of issues bearing on physical infrastructure and CFTC regulated markets. The subcommittee has now identified a plan of work that will lead to a report responsive to the tasks assigned by the commissioners. 3 working groups are currently engaged with issues relevant to petroleum, natural gas, and electricity. Each of these groups will provide analysis of the current state of physical infrastructure and its impacts on both physical and derivatives markets. The linkages between markets are also important, but given the sprawling topic, the working groups are addressing the topics individually to prepare a solid foundation for later analysis. The subcommittee has identified several interesting topics deserving special analysis. These include changing relationships and dependency across commodities and their respective infrastructures. One salient example of this was the February 2021 winter storm in Texas that led to widespread and prolonged electricity outages and sustained high prices that created issues for consumers and providers. Natural gas supplies were interrupted to some generators during that event, exacerbating very tight size supply conditions and preventing an expected supply response to high wholesale electricity prices. Second topic is how peak flows and physical volatility affect the sizing and utilization of infrastructure. Changes in utilization may reflect changes in demand that are driven by greater incidence of low frequency weather events. Infrastructure bottlenecks in the physical market can lead to price impacts that are then potentially transmitted to the derivatives markets. Third issue is how market design choices affect incentives to invest in physical infrastructure. Market rules vary across commodities and regions of the electric grid. Some designs may dampen important price signals and investment incentives. Other designs are more effective in transmitting those signals. As the energy transition proceeds, attention to how market designs affect infrastructure is an important issue. Fourth, changes in storage possibilities are another issue that affect these markets. The most obvious example of this is the incorporation of small but increasing amounts of power storage into electricity systems. Petroleum and natural gas markets have long had important storage sectors, though the storage capacity is unevenly distributed and has not always kept pace with expansion in physical volumes. Finally, because energy infrastructure involves high initial fixed costs, new projects may be affected by financing conditions. This challenge has 3 relevant dimensions: The first is how changes in infrastructure affect project finance conditions. Second is how broader financial conditions and trends affect the choice to channel capital towards energy projects. Third, permitting delays have emerged as a major issue across a variety of types of projects and have proved resistant to efforts to reduce them. The subcommittee looks forward to engaging with the many complex issues that arise around physical infrastructure and providing clear recommendations to the commissioners in the spring.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any comments or questions from the associate members of EMAC? Matt?
Hi, I'm Matthew Wing, AGA. First, thank you, Commissioner, for scheduling this meeting today. And I just want to reiterate, this subcommittee's report is very important. Both AGA members, and even the regulators we kind of need to kind of answer to in a way, both on the federal level and the state level. We have a lot of interest from our members related to the issue of pricing and infrastructure price volatility related to the lack of infrastructure, and that flows up to the state regulators that regulate retail rates. We always try to keep prices as I don't want to say less volatile as possible. We do a lot of hedging, but the point is we are answerable both to our customers and state regulators, and we think this report will go a long way in kind of talking about those issues with those regulators, both at a federal and state level. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else on the associate members? Are there any comments or questions from the EMAC members? Tyson?
Thank you. And I just want to thank Tim for all of his hard work on this subcommittee. I'm a member of the committee, and I also commend all the participants on the committee. I think it's been just a fantastic discussion and good perspective on a lot of the issues. I just wanted to build on something, Commissioner, that you mentioned on your recent trip back home to South Dakota, where you saw a lot of folks, saying no to wind. And, this South Dakota regulators in September just unanimously voted against providing a permit for the Navigator carbon dioxide pipeline. And, I wasn't involved in that, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't, Greenpeace or Sierra Club that led that opposition. It was ranchers, it was farmers. And I think Tim, I'm not gonna be able to articulate it as well as he did, where he said, we've identified permitting challenges as an issue, but finding solutions is a little elusive. That's not exactly, Tim, how you phrased it, but, and I think that is sort of the crux of the issue. Much like the discussion earlier about a preferred policy choice would be to pursue a carbon tax as a way, but that politically that's not feasible. And I think understanding the reality on the ground of landowners, of ranchers and farmers, that we're not going to permit everything that we want, or it's incumbent upon project developers to work a little harder to convince communities to host this infrastructure. That I don't think we should first seek to limit legal or constitutional rights of folks on the ground in these communities, but rather urge project developers to work a little harder to convince communities of the merits of siting these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyson. Any other comments from EMAC members? Commissioner?
Just another thank you to Professor Fitzgerald and to everyone serving on this subcommittee. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and certainly, there's a very interesting story to tell about the physical infrastructure and what that means for price volatility and how, our markets can help manage that to a certain extent, but also, where that lack of investment in physical infrastructure or, impediments to, building out some of the energy infrastructure needs that we have, what that does to our markets that people are using to try to hedge and smooth out some of the volatility into some of the, as you mentioned, the retail pricing as well. So there's a lot of information here, and kudos to the members of the subcommittee for trying to find how to narrow that, because I think this could be one where, you could continue to study this and look at this for 10, 20 years, and, being able to narrow it down to a few key issues is very difficult. So definitely appreciate that you guys have gotten that far. And I think it will be really interesting to see some of the conclusions that come from these discussions. So just thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you. I think that concludes our work here today. I want to say thank you to all of the members of EMAC and the associate members who participated in the discussion today. As always, thank you, Commissioner, for your leadership on all of these important issues. And thank you to Lauren, without whom none of us would be here getting this and making sure this happens. So appreciate everything that you do to make this work. And we look forward to the continuing work of EMAC. As the Commissioner said, I also look forward to hearing more about these reports and reading them when they're completed, and look forward to the next meeting of EMAC, which I believe will be sometime in the first part of 2024. And with that, I will turn it back over to Lauren.
Thank you, Dina. At this time, I'd like to allow Commissioner Mersinger to provide her closing remarks.
I'll keep these very short. Just thank you all again for being here, for all the work you're doing, and for making sure that this advisory committee is relevant and providing information that we can use here at the commission to do our job better. So just a big thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Mersinger. As an amendment to the roll call earlier in the meeting, I am stating for the record that EMAC member Jackie Roberts and associate members John Murphy and Bob Anderson have confirmed separately that they are in attendance for this meeting. Thank you to all EMAC members and associate members for your participation today. I think it was a really great meeting. And please be on the lookout for communications regarding the next open meeting in the near term. I think tentatively we're thinking February, Denver, maybe get your skis out. But for now, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.